We're changing the climate. The emission of CO2 through the burning of fossil fuels is warming up the Earth in a way that could lead to dangerous tipping points.
The impact of climate change will be felt mostly by countries that are close to the equator. It has nothing to do with how much CO2 they've emitted, it's just the way the Earth is. And most of the countries close to the equator are developing countries. So they will feel the greatest impact, they will have the highest increase in temperatures, they will have more floods, and that's because of the location.
We can predict that the population will rise to about 9 billion, and that's because most of the people in the world are in developing countries and they're young. They're going to live longer and they're going to have their own children. So even if the birth rate falls, the population is going to rise for at least the next 20 or 30 years. We can't predict beyond that stage. We hope it'll start falling, but we can't predict what will happen beyond about 2050. If we think about the world in 2050, I think it's going to be very important to ensure that inequalities are reduced. Not just the gross inequalities that we have within countries in Europe and the United States, but also the massive inequalities between the North, Europe and North America, and the southern countries, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. I think we've got to ensure that those gaps are narrower, not wider. The reason for that is that sub-Saharan Africa is one of the places that has not yet experienced the so-called demographic transition. The birth rate is still very high, the population is rising there, even though it's leveling off in Europe and North America. That's going to make it harder for Africa to get out of the poverty trap. Another reason it's going to be harder is that the way in which the East Asian countries developed was by undercutting the manufacturing costs in Europe and North America and having cheap labor so that we bought their goods. That gave a huge boost to places like South Korea and Vietnam and Taiwan. But of course, now robots are taking over manufacturing. So countries in Africa won't have that advantage. That ladder's being kicked away. So I think we've got to make sure that the wealthy nations ensure that countries in Africa can develop industry and develop a better standard of life. So I think for reasons that aren't purely altruistic, it's very important for us in Europe to ensure that there is a sort of mega Marshall Plan to develop Africa and ensure it catches up rather than falling behind the countries of Europe and the United States.
So modern economies have really changed a huge amount over the past half century or longer. If we look back just 50 years ago, international trade was only about 25% of total global economic output. Last year, it was closer to 65%. And that's a huge shift in the structure of the economy, where we used to produce things domestically and now we trade things. It's helped us share ideas and cultures and people across borders. But it hasn't always led to an equitable distribution of the gains or benefits from that trade. If you think the world is unequal in terms of its income right now, we are even more unequal in terms of the impacts that we are having on wealth. If we take one core example, the global climate system, right now what happens is wealthier people in wealthier countries overconsume, and actually have been for the past half century, actually have been for the past 150 years, over-consuming their component of the shared global carbon budget. We've been emitting more carbon than we should be allocated. And this really matters for international policy, it matters for climate change, and it matters for ethics and fairness in how we distribute the gains from trade. Right now, the way that we account for carbon emissions determines how we proceed in terms of policies like the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Climate Change Agreement.
Recorded CO2 emissions from Africa are about 10% of the United States, one continent compared to one country. This recorded CO2, there could be more, but this is what is recorded. It's less than 10% of the United States emissions. So it's possible for Africa or other developing countries within the African continent to say, you know what, we're good, we're not doing anything. We're still less than the United States put together. However, it's not a good position to take. So that's a reactive position, saying we're not doing anything, we want to develop because we do know that decarbonization is expensive. As we develop, we will need more energy. So should developed countries be made or be held responsible for helping underdeveloped countries develop their industries, since for so long developed nations have gotten to where they are using fossil fuels, and underdeveloped countries still need to grow their industries? I would say yes and no. I will say yes, because they should be encouraged to help developing nations to grow their industrial base based on clean energy sources, because they can easily transfer technology to developing nations. Should they be forced to? Now, this again is why I said no, because at the end of the day, we want a just transition.
We need climate change policies because we need governments to tackle the issue of greenhouse gas emissions that contributes to the change of the climate as we know it. Only through regulations, only through means of monitoring and maintaining a stable climate, we can deal with the issues that climate change is causing with it, which is extreme weather events, which is magnified natural disasters. In some of my research in the United States and India, it is quite clear that there is ethnic and racial diversity in the communities that are more exposed to climate change effects themselves. So we need to address the fact that the new future economy that is embedded more in clean assets and that takes climate change seriously does not do it just by essentially substituting the work in fossil fuel sectors and just injecting it into, say, renewable sectors, because we do need to bring with us all those minorities that the fossil fuel economy has actually excluded or has made vulnerable. So that's what ideally a just transition will look like, bringing also those minorities, those group at risk with us and embedding them in the future economy.
One of the things that I've been working on for many years is efforts to rethink and redesign international public finance to a more modern and universal system of international transfers of money between countries called global public investment, or GPI. So the system of international aid, which has been hugely important, has also been a very narrow way of financing our global needs. It's focused on a few donor countries, often the G7, couple of dozen countries as donors to problems which all countries confront. And there's never enough money, and there's never the right sort of money either. There's not the money that goes to the places where it's really needed. Global public investment is a very different approach to financing our international needs. It's one where, contrary to a system where a few countries contribute and in turn set the rules, determine the governance, decide how problems will be solved, we have all countries contributing to the extent that they are able to, and also, because they're contributors, having a say in how those problems are managed and how the funds are used. And this, while on one level a very simple change, is transformative in terms of how it opens up to addressing some of the collective action problems that we confront, whereby countries, be they Brazil, South Africa, countries that have the capacity to contribute to international agendas, are reluctant to do so until they have a greater say in how the decisions are made. Global public investment could be funded in a number of different ways that are more appropriate to the objectives of our international agendas, such as addressing climate change. And you could do that, for example, through taxes on oil, or you could do it on taxes on international shipping and trade, things that impact upon the environment. But you could also do it through establishing dedicated budget lines within each country. Norway has recently considered the idea of whether, in addition to having a certain portion of its national income dedicated to poverty reduction in poor countries, it might also have a budget line dedicated to financing things that we often describe as global public goods, things such as clean air, climate mitigation measures, things such as pandemic protection. And these are, of course, all things that are becoming more and more important in the world today.
Climate change needs to be addressed by international politics because it is an international issue to begin with. It is true that not all countries have been responsible to the problem. The early industrializers have produced more emissions and had contributed to climate change earlier in the process. But at this point, the entire world will be suffering from climate change. And in fact, fossil fuel investments and carbon emissions are also increasingly coming from parts of the world that historically have not been responsible at this point in time. And the only way to be dealing with the issue effectively and credibly requires some type of international agreement, some level of international cooperation. There is no way in which only one country can solve the problem.